with you today.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's an honor and a thrill to talk to you. I have with me Billy Ray Valentine. He's another talk show host on my network, and he's the one that kind of got me into having a show. And so he's probably going to ask you a few questions too.
Okay, and that is Bill?
Yeah, Billy Ray. And so he'll be asking some questions too. But thanks so much for making time for me. And let me thank you too, right out the bat. Again, what an honor it was for me that you wrote the foreword to my new book. I mean, it's really it's wonderful, and the book is starting off real well. And I think your name on it obviously has.
Oh, good. Glad it's working for you.
Yeah, and I'm sure your name has a lot to do with it. So. Anyhow, so much I could ask you. Again, I've been gratified to talk to a lot of people that I admired over the years, but you are at the top of the list. When you were in Congress, I followed your career, and the fact that you were the only member of Congress, really, I guess, since maybe Wright Patman, I guess, was the last guy before you that became a really foremost critic of the Fed. So, starting out as a medical doctor, what or spurred you to enter politics?
Well, I never thought of myself as entering politics. I was curious enough to start reading in the 1960s, even when I was in medical school. If I wanted some extra things to study and read, it turned to economics. In the 1960s, especially, and the 70s, there was a lot of activity going on with the dollar and gold. But I was reading Austrian economics and came across the school of thought in the 60s, so that was very early on, and the predictions were made that that whole system would break down, and Henry Hazlitt said it would never work, even in 1945. So when that happened in 1971, it really caught my attention, and I thought, well, I think the money issue is a big deal. So I did a lot of studying, kept up with it, and started speaking out on it, and saw an opportunity to talk about it because the 70s were so chaotic. We had wage and price controls and runaway inflation, interest rates at 21%, and there was an explanation. I thought a bunch of clowns were in Washington, and so I thought nobody wanted to run in 1974, the first time I ran, because it was a Watergate year, and Texas was still all Democrat, that even the Republicans, wanted me to run just to have a name on the ballot. And that was sort of a fluke because the individual resigned and it was set up the stage for winning a special election. So that sort of came accidentally, but my goal was always to work on the monetary issue. And then the longer I was in Washington and dealing with these issues, the more fascinated I came with the putting together the whole issue around money, because if you don't like what's happening overseas and you don't like what's happening here in the domestic economy and welfareism, you can't deal with that without looking at the moral hazard of being able to print the world currency. Because that's like printing the gold, and as long as the people trust it and think.
So you made, obviously this came to be your predominant issue, but where do you think, and obviously your son now in the Senate, Rand Paul, where does that stand when he was trying to get the Fed audited? Because, of course, Donald Trump, that's one of his many campaign promises that he talked about that he hasn't delivered on. Do you think there's still any effort there? Is Rand still trying to get the Fed audited?
Oh, yeah, the best he can, and we still talk a lot about it in Campaign for Liberty, and we have state organizations. We're concentrating right now on trying to get resolutions and laws passed at the state where gold and silver is legal tender, because the Constitution is rather clear. And that's not magic. That doesn't mean that we're on the verge of getting rid of the Fed and having a gold standard and getting an audit done. But it's all important to get people understanding the issue. And even though Trump hasn't exactly followed through what he alluded to, and that he'd have an audit, it still is important because it stays in the news. Just like Judy Shelton, being suggested as a member of the Federal Reserve Board. No, she's not exactly where we are in the gold standard, but the fact that they're condemning her now because she even thinks gold is worth thinking and talking about. I mean, I think that's all very good, because this system will come apart. And the only thing that usually happens, it's orderliness in the economy can only come about by getting a decent currency again, and that is backing it by something of real value, silver and gold.
Well, does Rand have Donald Trump's ear at all? Has he been able to ask him anything about the Fed or push him on that whatsoever?
I've never asked Rand, but my guess would be that there's been other issues that probably came to attention because he's talked to him a few times, and that is the medical thing issue, trying to get some regulations passed, which they've had some success on trying to undermine Obamacare. So he's gotten that done, and I think he's had some influence on foreign policy, even though it's almost impossible to figure out exactly where Trump's coming from because. One day he's for bombing Iran, the next day he says, no, that's a bad idea, somebody might die. So I think he has more influence there. I just don't think that when you get in there in office like that it's going to get the attention necessary to move it along. But I think the fact that he was probably the only candidate that was likely to become president that said that, we ought to know what's going on there. But that's not going to happen. But I don't, that doesn't mean I am less enthusiastic. Matter of fact, I'm as enthusiastic as ever to talk about it, whether in auditing. I don't think a real audit's going to occur. The reason you want an audit is to expose them. And I think if they don't allow the audit, this is a good example of why don't they want an audit? Because they're hiding a lot. And I think the Fed is going to end, the whole system will end, not because all of a sudden we had an audit and there was a vote and they voted to close it down. It's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, because it's getting attention and trying to say, well, why do you want to get rid of the Fed? Well, for a very good reason. They're causing all the trouble. And right now we're dealing with how are they going to work out a QEs? Quantitative easing has just been a horrendous problem. And there's still a lot of excitement and positive thinking. Stock markets are still high, and yet it's a huge bubble. It's a stock bubble. There's a debt bubble and a bond bubble, and so many distortions that will come to an end, and we'll have to deal with the problem.
Well, you and I have been saying. I mean, obviously, you've been saying it for a lot longer and to a much bigger audience. But I've been talking about. I don't see how an economy built like ours is presently can continue without collapsing. And I know you've been talking about it a long time as well, and talk about the bubble that's artificially holding it up. But they did have a partial audit, and I think Rand was partially responsible for that, wasn't it? Not that many years ago, and it revealed some was it trillions or something that had been steered to corporate corporations and banks.
Yeah, a little bit came out of it. We had a bill in after the crash in 2008 and 2009, and then at the last minute they accepted some that would look into some of the finances that went on overseas, but you really didn't get to look at the books. And I think they came up with some numbers that they probably used about $15 trillion to bail out banks and governments and try to smooth things over. And on the short run, they could argue, yeah, but we saved the day. And in some ways, that's true. They were able to patch this system, but it's also made a bigger bubble, But we had that, but it wasn't really a true audit of what we need. And that is, even though we found out that they had used these trillions and trillions of dollars in overseas activity, they're into subsidizing and interfering overseas because that's what they cherish and want to protect as much as anything is all their overseas activity. That will be the last thing that you'll hear about. And I think it's always very much connected to foreign policy as well, because as long as our credit is good and we can do certain things, we can prop up governments and, we control the financial system. We can put on sanctions and deny them the use of the financial markets and SWIFT, and they keep thinking about what will the alternative be. And so far they don't have one. But there will be one, because someday we'll wake up and people will be racing out of the system and looking for something else. Yeah,
definitely. And the foreign policy area is the other area where obviously we are we are in complete accord on. And I'm wondering what you think of. Some people have called Tulsi Gabbard a Democratic version of Ron Paul, at least on foreign policy. She sounds a lot like you when she talks. Or have you listened to much of what she has had to say?
Oh yeah, I listened to it, and I've said favorable things about her because one interview I had, they said, "Well, of all that list, who do you like on the Democratic Party?" I says, "Well, I really haven't studied them. It's pretty boring for me. There's 20 of them, and I can't even name them all. But if I had to pick one that's worth anything, I would say Tulsi Gabbard has a good foreign policy." And some people interpreted that I had just fully endorsed her for candidate, which I have not. But I would say that because she's willing to speak out on foreign policy, that she would probably be the safest and best of all those that are running for office on the Democratic side.
Yeah, because the rest of them, I don't see any of them saying too many things that I agree with. But at least when she talks foreign policy, she does. Billy Ray, you want to jump? You have some questions for Dr. Paul?
Hey, Dr. Paul, how are you? My name is Billy Ray Valentine. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
Don is very aware of this, but you are the only person I have ever been motivated to vote for. Now, I got a lot of slack for that, but if I don't feel a candidate is moral enough, I'm just not going to vote for them. And you're the only one, so it's a pleasure. And one of the main reasons why I did was your foreign policy, your stance on foreign policy, because it just doesn't seem to change no matter who's in office. The agenda continues, and now, I mean, they've been knocking on Venezuela's door for a long, long time. And they seem like they're not going to stop until they get their way. And Iran is in their scope as well, and it has been for a long time. But almost blatant false flags have taken place at this point in order to push whatever war they want to push. How do you see this all turning out in Iran?
Badly. And I have spent a lot of time on it, did my program today on this because they're getting pushed a little bit hard, and not only had they've gone over the limit of their uranium, they have also said we're going to further enrich past the 3.67, and they're very adamant. And of course, I think every accusation leveled at the Iranians has been wrong. I think we're the ones that broke the treaty. We're the ones that got out. The Europeans promised that they would help the Iranians if we ever put sanctions on after this treaty, if anybody got out of the treaty. And so they haven't fulfilled their promises either. So I think it's ratcheting up. I think that one thing that people should be concerned about is, taking out of what they think are certain sites, and Israel is quite capable of doing that. They did it in the 1980s. I think that might appeal to Trump more than using our own airplanes. But no, I think it's getting much worse. And the other thing to be really concerned about is we do talk about Trump's inconsistencies. He, is ready to do one thing one day. North Korea, the worst monsters that ever existed, and then now they're our best friends. But he's been very consistent. During the campaign, immediately after he was elected president, he went to Saudi Arabia and Israel, mainly to assure them that Iran was a target. And so that is going to exist. I don't think all of a sudden there's going to be a shift of attitude in seeing Trump talking with the Ayatollah like we have talked to Un in North Korea.
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's what do you at this point? So many of us. I mean, I was attracted to Donald Trump to my amazement because I thought this guy, he's a New York billionaire, and I just knew him from reality TV. I wasn't impressed with him at all, but he just said some revolutionary stuff during the campaign that attracted a lot of independents like myself. And of course, he's really been largely disappointing to me. His rhetoric is so different from the way he acts. He reminds me a little bit of Ronald Reagan in that respect. I'm sure you remember how Reagan would talk up cutting government and really never even cut a sub-agency his entire time he was in there. But his rhetoric was strong, and his supporters remained faithful to him. What is your assessment so far of Donald Trump as president?
Well, it all depends on which subject. I think that Trump did well by getting taxes lowered and also regulations reduced, which has probably helped both in reality and perceptually and psychologically, and it's been a boost. But structurally and philosophically, it's all the same. It's all the same. It's all the spending. Republicans and Democrats are in bed together when it comes to Federal Reserve activity, when it comes to deficit financing, when it comes to the world empire. That they all this argument and fighting is just over power. But they get along quite well with the spending. So no matter what you hear in the campaigns, I don't think you can rely on Bush. I thought Bush's foreign policy in the year 2000 was pretty good because he didn't want to be a nation building. We didn't want to be the policeman of the world, and we should be a humble nation. And that was all misinformation. He was not telling us the truth. Trump, I think, tells the truth, but he gets confused. He doesn't remember, and he switches around. I don't know what's going on with him. But the other thing is I don't like his foreign policy. I think it's still very dangerous. I think he's looking for trouble, especially in Iran. But if you take his 3 years and compare it to the first 3 years of Obama or Bush or anybody else, the number of Americans that have died or the number of foreigners that have died at our hands, I would say I bet he comes out pretty well. It's probably been less, but he still is very, very militant. There's no doubt. And he would say, you're darn right, because I'm tough. Nobody's going to mess with us. And that's why we're going to demonstrate on the 4th of July. 4th of July is all about tanks and airplanes to try to intimidate everybody so they never touch us. That's how you have peace. And some people will say, well, maybe he's making a point, but that's not the point I would think is worthwhile.
Well, a lot of us held out hope that he would have some real outsiders in his administration. I mean, if you're going to drain the swamp, I think that's kind of necessary. And I don't see a single outsider in it. I thought maybe you would be named Secretary of Treasury or the head of the Fed. Wouldn't that be great? But if not you, maybe Rand. But he just keeps. I mean, people like Bolton and Pompeo. I mean, I don't know how, because do you get the impression, as I do, that at least if he's sincere at all, when he goes on Twitter, he appears to be speaking for himself, like when the Trump-Putin summit that he had last. He's all
doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Doesn't add up, and that means that the deep state's pretty powerful if they can get all their people in. Having Bolton in there. But sometimes it looks like he's appealing to two groups. He has Bolton there, and Bolton put a monkey wrench into negotiations in Korea, and also yet the other day when Trump backed off and said, "I'm going to hold off on bombing Iran," the neocons went nuts. So, but he appealed to the people who didn't want him to bomb. At the same time, he didn't sound weak. People know that he's capable of doing it. But no, it's totally inconsistent. That if he were truly moving toward our foreign policy, he would not have Bolton and Pompeo and Haspel and all these people in this administration, because they'll do anything and everything to undermine, because you can imagine everybody under these people are also going to be opposed to anything that's non-intervention. They believe in the empire, and it's not going to, most Americans unfortunately probably believe in it, in the empire, and that's where the problem is. I think it's not personalities as much as philosophic. If you're dealing with economics, it's the fact that everybody in college almost has studied Keynesian economics, and that's why Keynesian economics is followed, and deficits don't matter, and the Federal Reserve is okay. Same way with foreign policy. Everybody's been taught this for years and years. Oh, yeah, we do too much here, and we shouldn't have done that in Iraq, and we shouldn't have done Vietnam, but we still have to be the leader of the world because we're an exceptional nation, and they go on and on. So it's philosophically taught in our universities, and that gives them all cover. So they might not all be John Bolton, but they all support intervention, and that's what a problem is. So people have to speak out and defend total non-interventionism, so that they understand what it really is.
Hey, Don, if you don't mind, let me jump in here real quick.
Sure. Go ahead.
You made reference to Pompeo and Bolton, and we spoke about Donald Trump earlier and how he's indecisive or forgetful. Now, he appointed these people. He appointed Bolton. He appointed Pompeo to continually fill this swamp, right? In my opinion, the U.S. has never dropped more bombs on Afghanistan, right, than they are right now. He's dropped more bombs than the Obama administration did. It's insane what's going on. The empire, 170,000 troops in 150 countries. It's insane what's going on. And I don't think we hold Donald Trump as accountable as we should. Saying that he's forgetful, I think we should really press him on what's going on and the people that he's brought in to this administration. He appointed them. What do you think of that, Dr. Paul?
Well, I think that's true, but the big problem is that the media is controlled by the deep state, so you're not going to get it on TV. So you and I could claim that they should do this, and if we have an audience, maybe we'll convert them one-on-one, but we don't have access to the big audience, and they give excuses for Trump and allow him to get away with it because there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of money, but even Trump is not really either economics or foreign policy-wise. He thinks that it's very good to be close allies with Saudi Arabia and being involved in Yemen because it's good for business, And as a matter of fact, that was the reason he said the other day that he didn't think we should do the bombing. We don't want to interrupt we want to be able to build weapons and drop bombs, but we don't want to kill too many people, So that's the big problem. Changing perception is a big deal, but ultimately it's a little bit more than the media. See, the media is controlled by the philosophy of the universities too, because they've all learned this stuff. In a university, which fits into the people who want the power. The people who want the power in the banking industries or in the politics, and they want this, so they get the masses to go along with it, mainly because the educational system, the political system, all endorses these ideas.
Well, going back to your especially your 2012 presidential campaign. Again, I knew of you from years before, and I was really shocked that the way your campaign caught fire, especially among young people, was kind of a precursor of what would happen with the Bernie Sanders campaign and Trump as well in 2016, where I think people are looking for something different. And in 2012, were you? I mean, how shocked are you, especially the young people? I can tell you, my son was involved in your campaign. His friend, I went to Ron Paul parties, where it was. I'd never been to parties before where it was just all young people and they were all devoted to you. And it was like Billy Ray was saying. I've been voting a lot longer than Billy Ray has, and really that casting a vote for you in my primary was really one of the few times in my life that I could vote for a candidate, because usually I'm just voting against the incumbent or voting for whatever third-party candidate, but it was really gratifying to know, and obviously we were so disappointed because I think that the way you were kind of ignored in the media, but before we get into that, so what were you surprised at the way your campaign caught fire, especially among young people?
Yeah, I think so, because I was surprised I ever went to Congress. I didn't think people would pay much attention, but others were more optimistic that the people were starved for somebody just to tell them the truth, even if they didn't agree with you on all the issues, but they wanted to hear a straight story. And I think Trump comes across as that. He lets them know, he says things about the political correctness, and people say, yeah, we like people that do this. So there was a lot of that. But once again, what you saw, and still goes on, I still go out and talk on the college campuses and YAL, and there's still a fair amount of enthusiasm. But that's what really counts. The people, the masses, usually are just followers, and it's the leadership. They say that it takes about 7 or 8% of the population to really lead the charge, but it has to be intellectual, and they have to, have access. Today, we complain about the media, but there's alternative media too already. There's you and I are talking right now, and I have an internet program, and we still reach people. So just because the masses are still being influenced from day to day from what they've just heard on television, is just a reflection of the intellectuals groundwork that is out there. But that has to be refuted, and I think hopefully now the big thing is they say, yeah, they were enthusiastic when you were a candidate, but they don't even know who you are or anything else. But you're still thinking about some of the things that you came across back then. There are others. I run into people now that are still very, very active, and I didn't even know they existed, because they heard a message and it seemed logical, and they became enthusiastic about it. So I remain an optimist that keep talking out, and that's why somebody like you should stay doing exactly what you're doing and reaches as many people, because maybe there's a couple people you've talked to that you don't even know that is, taking the message and spreading it someplace else. So that is what really counts compared to, what Pelosi's doing with John Boehner and what kind of a deal they made and that kind of stuff. That is all very secondary.
Yeah, well, I think that's what a lot of us are trying to do. Is it's very frustrating. We call people whether they're awake or not, and it's trying to awake people one at a time, and that's it's a slow process. But get into your campaign. I think that I want to touch on the thing that I noticed back then, and when I mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. She reminded me of you again after that first Democratic debate. I don't know if you read about it or not, but she cleaned up, not quite to the degree that you did in 2012, and I'm sure you're aware of that. Back in 2012, you would get 70-80% on every online poll after the debates that you won. I mean, everybody on the internet was for you. And the media would again downplay it and not mention that, and they would talk Rick Santorum, who was drawing 10 people at a rally, and I was at one of your rallies near here, and the people were wrapped around the building 3 times. We were lucky to get inside, so I saw firsthand how you were really drawing the crowds, and the media was downplaying it, I think, because of your message. But Tulsi Gabbard, after the first debate, it was not quite the degree of you, but I think she got like almost 50%. Of the and one of nobody else I think even got 10% of the candidates. So she was the clear winner online, but they barely mentioned her in the major media. So did you used to get frustrated because obviously that happened to you over and over again, where they would, and I think it was Jon Stewart who a couple times on the Daily Show kind of commented about that. How they weren't mentioning you.
Well, no, I avoided the frustration because I just really didn't have high expectations. I knew who the people I was dealing with. People said, "Weren't you frustrated with all those people in Congress that we see as creeps?" I said, "Not really, because I dealt with them in a different level. It was all a personal thing. I didn't confront them. I didn't like the confrontation. I didn't expect too much from them, but I was pleasantly surprised that we were able to move people and challenge the establishment. So I think if you have the message and you're comfortable with it, and you just say, well, let the chips fall where they may, and they just much better than I ever expected. So I was pleased with that. Don, I have to mention to you that I have to finish by the bottom of the hour. I have another call coming in.
Okay, I wasn't sure how long we were going for. Okay, so what, Billy Ray, do you have any final thoughts, and then I'll ask something?
Well, I have there's a couple of things, but in the interest of time, I want to know if you're familiar with the Council on National Policy. I've been hearing a lot of stuff about this council. Like, it's kind of like the Council on Foreign Relations. It's very secretive, right wing. I know Rand had a meeting with them in 2015 of some sort. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, and I think way back, I don't know how long they've been in existence, but I think it was back even, could have been in the 1990s. I might have visited with them. I don't know much about them. I can't make a comment because I don't know where they are, or what they're doing, or what their positions are, or anything like that. But I'm aware of them, but just vaguely so.
Okay. And I wanted to touch a little bit just on during in 2012. what I thought was voter fraud, and a lot of us did out here, and I believe you kind of alluded to it a few times. But what are your thoughts on that, especially considering what happened in the 2016 campaign, where we know the DNC emails reveal that they conspired to steal the nomination from Bernie Sanders for Hillary Clinton? Somehow that's been twisted and transformed into this absurd fairy tale that Russia, was hacked the election. Russia certainly had nothing to do with your difficulties in the primaries, but a lot of us feel that you were really, cheated in those primaries. What are your thoughts on the voting fraud that you might have seen?
I think that was the case. The second race I ran, I lost by 300 votes out of 250,000 votes or something, and we found thousands and thousands of illegal votes. I think it's just part of the voting process. It falls in the category of why is there so much money in campaigning? Why is there so much money in lobbying? And why is this corruption? Because there's an incentive. Government is so powerful and it has so much. There's so many special interests that benefit from this. So I think that's a consequence of having us gotten too close to pure democracy. That whoever can grab the majority vote, has so much clout. So I think that's part of it. As long as you're going to have big government like this, and then have election and call it the democratic process, you're going to have people doing this because they're motivated by power, and I think that's the biggest problem that we have.
Well, do you support? There's an increasing, and I think the Democrats are actually pushing. Again, I think they're doing it because they absurdly believe Russia somehow hacked into our elections. But do you? I've a long time believed that we should try to go back to paper ballots. I don't trust electronic voting machines. Are you aware of the move for that? Do you support it?
Yeah, I would. But then again, it depends on what people believe in. We had this movement on term limitations, and I generally supported it, even early on. But you say, well, we'll get the good guys on. But the people who come in on term limitations are being influenced by bad economics, bad history, bad foreign policy, and all these things. So it's just sort of a musical chair type of thing. So I don't think you have to do your best to have an honest election, but I'd like to see it where people aren't that interested in elections, but they can do us in if you're not. You have to do it out of self-defense. But I want to get rid of the system that is such a monstrosity that's always attacking us. So I'm interested in reducing the size and scope of government, and the best way to do that is get rid of the Federal Reserve, and then they couldn't afford all this stuff that they do.
Right, that's right. Well, I know you said okay. I don't want to keep you any longer, but just leave us on this thought. Is there anything you see out there, or do you have reason to be optimistic for America's future at all? I'm not optimistic. Are you?
No, I'm more optimistic probably than you are, but I'm also very pessimistic, like you are, about how this thing's going to unwind. I think the bubble is going to burst, but I think the seeds have been planted. I think the experience I've had indicates that people can change their minds, and they will receive the message of liberty. And when everybody's broke, maybe they'll be more willing to do it. And if they see the correction being come, so I think that we're going to go through it. The more government does, the longer it'll last. The more willing they are to permit the liquidation of debt and malinvestment, and the willingness to restore sound currency and the principles of limited government, the shorter the agony will be. But so the crisis will come. Things will get worse, but it might. I don't think it'll get cleared up in a year. But in time, there's no reason why you and your kids might have a better system than ever. But it's not going to be done without people doing a lot of hard work and a lot of effort in education to know what people can defend and how they can defend what personal liberty is all about.
Certainly. Well, that's great. I really appreciate you giving us your time today. I can't tell you what an honor it is for both of us to talk to you. I've admired you for so long, and like I said, just to have your name on the cover of my latest book is amazing, an amazing honor as well, and it's even more gratifying to talk to you. So thank you so much, Ron.
Very good. Good to be with you.
Thank you,
Take
sir.
care.
Take it easy, Dr. Paul.
Okay, thank you.